You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Fredrick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I am Michael Halcomb and I'm here with Dr. Fredrick J. Long. And this is Proof Text. We're going to be discussing Galatians today. We're in chapter 5. Before we do that, just thought I'd give a couple of shout outs from those of you who've been listening to the podcast. Stephen Harris recently commented on our YouTube page. This one's for Dr. Noonan. He says, Dr. Noonan, thank you for this series. I look forward to it every week. That's awesome. The SLA Insights series. So it's really good to hear that. It's a great series. We're thrilled that Dr. Noonan is on the podcast team, and she's doing a great job. Another one, Thaddeus Sales. I hope I'm saying your last name right, buddy. It's not like Salis or something like that, but Thaddeus Sales, he's commented on a few of the fallacy of the week ones recently, and he's talking about how the Twitter theologians of the world are pretty rough, and he says the world loves sharing that stuff because it requires no thinking to process. And I hope it's okay that I'm sharing this, but he says it's super vague and short phrases allow people to build their own meaning and hence their own lack of definitions. And he's on point there. It says Twitter has become the crescendoing demise of our society.
Kind of reminds me of horoscopes, right? I mean, they're so generic and undefined that people could fill in what they want.
Exactly. He says instead of articulate arguments, people just insult one another when they're proven wrong, which is so true. Even Facebook. I've had two liberals in my one in my Nazarene tribe here in our district in Hawaii. I commented with the biblical explanations of Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit stuff, and the lady just deleted me. She's a pastor. She was using it to promote homosexuality, essentially, which is crazy that she was using those verses to do that. But she completely left out the vice list that precedes the fruit of the spirits. And so this gender stuff she's trying to promote. And and I had another one. United Methodist friend went to Asbury together, and this person was just posting something that their bishop wrote, this devotion that their bishop wrote, and it was just absolute hogwash, nothing but an out of context argument for sexual immorality. And this person's a United Methodist bishop. I think the whole United Methodist Church has gone that way anyway, but that's why I left it. So it's hard to stomach some of that. But I called out the proof texting and got deleted, So that's how they roll.
It's just a delete, cancel culture, it's just a cancel culture where we're not able to engage ideas and you just shut people down.
Yeah.
There's no respect. There's no respect for conversation. You
gotta love it when a centrist United Methodist who is always bragging about let's just talk, let's just have conversation deletes you when you leave. A remark that is worthy of response. But anyways, that's the centrist agenda I've found. Even with the very few liberal Nazarenes that I know, it's always let's talk, and then when you actually try to set up a talk, they'll never make it happen. It's so it's just they play this game. Let's talk, and then when it gets down to brass tacks, they won't ever really talk. Anyways,
it's a breakdown of civil discourse more generally. I mean, we see it in our broader culture. Political debates become sound bites
Yeah.
So really not debates, but bites, sound bites. And so who can win the sound bite? It's really just sad
Oh,
because
that's right. It's so
it's a
true.
watering down of our culture, and
Hmm.
what makes us great as human beings is our ability to discourse and dialogue and debate and uh, parry ideas with one another. And
Hmm.
one of the things I love about Jordan Peterson is he's willing to give it a go and kind of speak plainly and get out there. And I think we need to show courage increasingly and take
Yeah.
stands, and that's not easy to do. um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. He doesn't always speak plainly. He's out there sometimes with some very deep stuff, but he is intriguing to listen to. And you love those clips or those scenes where he's just straight putting somebody in their place by unraveling their logic fallacy before their very eyes.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
good at that. So
Good at framing, reframing,
yeah,
definitions.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think we need to be real good at definitions as well. Like,
definitely,
what is things? And let's be clear about our definitions and not wishy
absolutely.
washy in our thinking. But that takes
It
training and time and skill,
does. That's why
effort.
I've got the fallacy of the week thing on the podcast. Just every week, week in and week out, like it helps me stay sharp, right? Like,
Hmm.
oh, what is this fallacy? What do we call this, right? How do I
Yeah.
define this? In my Bible intro to Bible class right now, one of the things that I'm doing every week is putting a meme up on the screen and just say, all right, let's stop. We're it's because there's this, you talk about sound bites, but I've often talked about meme theology as well. A lot of people get their theology from memes, believe it or not, their
Mm,
beliefs from memes. And so we take about 15, 20 minutes. I'll throw a meme up there that's making some sort of theological claim and let the students begin to just pick at it. And by the end of that, it's so edifying every single time. And I've asked them, do you guys think we should, continue doing this? And I'm like, please, please, please. And then we'll go right into like exegesis after that. But
so pulling apart the latent assumptions in a
yeah,
meme, the
yeah,
images. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's great. I
yes,
kind of think, when inductive Bible study, this ability which Michael has been trained in, uh, to pull things and recognize structure, and then the meaning and ideology, like inductive Bible study training, being trained in those skills of observation and asking questions, and
yes,
uh, that one of the goals, I guess, from its start was to be able to exegete culture in a sense. And so I
yes,
think we need to exegete not only the biblical text but also our culture. And to hear you
absolutely.
doing that,
Yeah,
you're just a master teacher in many ways, Michael. I think you're very gifted, and
thank you.
what a creative way to engage people. Yeah, I'm always inspired by what you do. It makes me think, tomorrow night I got exegesis class. What could I
Yeah,
do there? I've been really, honestly, frustrated with sermons and the lack of biblical exposition.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
it's really affecting me, my heart. It's cutting me deep to my heart. And the Lord has given me words to speak in certain situations with grace, because you need to be graceful with people, but then also just the deleterious effects that it has,
Hmm.
because people see the exposition or the lack of it, and then when there's other kind of things thrown in there that and then the exposition is real simple. Jesus changes whatever he touches. Like, well, that's
Mm,
such a general point. Yes, okay, who can debate that? But what did it take to get there? There's a
yeah.
lot of damage in the meantime. So a recent sermon I heard, I actually got up and left during
Mm,
it. And then I went back and listened, and I'm like, what is redeeming here? Is there some redeeming things? But I'm still kind of bothered by it,
yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, that's why I refuse to not go deep every single time I step in the pulpit. Period.
Mm,
You know, I had
yeah.
charts up during my sermon yesterday showing and I spent so much time last week. I was preaching Transfiguration in Mark 9, 2 to 13. It's the hardest sermon I've written out of Mark yet.
Wow.
But, uncovering these connections between Exodus, First Kings, Malachi, and Mark. And I had that all up in a chart. Like, here are a dozen connections, a feeding before Moses goes on the mountain. Ascends the mountain. There's a call to obey. There's glory on his face. And having all this in a chart, and people have their phones out literally during the service taking pictures of the charts. This is
Yeah.
something they want to go back and study, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken years to sort of nurture a culture of deep study, and we're a small congregation, 40 to 50 if we're lucky on a given weekend, right? But I'd rather have 40 or 50 that are willing to just go deep every time than 5,000 who want a surface sermon week in and week out, right? I want those, even 20 or 30 who are willing to go deep. Give me that over the surface sermons. So I can't deal with that shallow preaching and the shallow homiletics, and that just leads. We've already seen where it leads. It leads to where the United Methodist Church is today.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've sat under that preaching. I grew up United Methodist. Didn't really hear of a sermon on salvation, expository sermon, until I came to seminary here, and I sat under Terry Ferris, and he preached on John 3:16. I remember that. Like, whoa, okay, so this there's another kind of preaching that exists out there.
yes.
And then you're just really hungry. I think people are hungry for exposition, true exposition. The pastor teacher, like those two go
pastor
together.
Theologian,
The pastor teacher, pastor theologian. Like, who else can do this work?
Yeah.
Who else in the congregation? Who has the training? Who has the time? Who's being paid? What are you being paid to do? Elders who teach are worthy of a double honor. Well, it's because they're teaching. Like, in other words, they're being paid. I think the double honor means that they're getting something more. Why? Because, in the ancient world, most of your day was spent, procuring food and water and this kind of stuff. Well, here's somebody who is, how many tens of hours of daylight are they studying when they can, studying scripture in antiquity? I mean, we have software that we can do things quickly. I mean, they didn't, they probably, I don't know, they have little books and comparing, I mean, that takes time, and reading out loud. I mean, that took a lot of time. And I just think, boy, we got to rediscover that teaching, preaching pastor, because where else is the congregation going to get it? Most of their week is going to be media, social media, and that's their main flood of worldview formation is social media.
Exactly.
TikTok, sound bites, Instagram, terrible stuff.
That's
Netflix.
why I said meme theology, and that's why that's why we have the fallacy of the week on here. That's why we're doing the meme thing in the Bible class. It's so important. I got a cache of interesting memes if you want to use some of them for your classes.
Well, I think I would take some, at least, definitely. I think it's a great idea. Well, we are talking about Galatians here today, and we're going to look at really the manifestation of the deeds of the evidence of the deeds of the flesh. And I think one of the manifestations is this discourse, which is banal. It is insidious. It is trying to create in us appetites. We're being instrumentalized to be commercial creatures that buy things. And that's what's driving this economy, the world economy. Unfortunately, there are huge players and companies, and we can name, industrial military complex. We could talk about pharma. We could talk about food, all this kind of stuff. And these advertisements are getting us to want stuff. These advertisements, these memes, these whatever, are trying to get us to shape us in terms of our vices. They're trying to not instill virtue. They're trying to instill vice in order that we become instruments of the world and are used used hollowed out shells of people rather than flourishing people made in the image of God, following our beloved Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, living lovingly, sacrificially, truthfully, courageously, sacrificially in this world. And so, yeah, we're going to be looking at Galatians 5:19 and no, 18 and 19. 18 and 19. And we're going to get into a vice list, and we were like, well, should we go, put a couple more verses in there? But no, we're going to keep it slow and look at these vices. And we need to, because these vices, usually there's like whole conceptual world underneath these words. And our English translations, usually they go one for one. And there's usually more to be thought of. And so we're going to need to look up these words, kind of read some definitions, kind of understand that there's a larger conceptualization underneath some of these words as we look at these verses. So, Michael, do you want to get us started by reading the Greek text of verse 18?
Galatians 5:18. We got it here. And it starts with "ide." So we have "ide pneumati aieste, uk este hyponomon." Very short verse. Notice again we have the epsilon upsilon, which is ev pneumati, and then we have the alpha gamma epsilon. Remember, in the environment of an epsilon following a gamma, the gamma becomes a Y sound. So this is not Auguste, but aye, aye, aye. So ayeste. It really sounds like the word yes there in the middle, not guess. So ayeste with the stress on the alpha. Ide pneumati ayeste, ukeste hyponomon. That's kind of interesting because I don't know if you folks heard it or if you heard it, Fred, but when you have ayeste and ukeste back to back, they kind of echo each other, right? Ide pneumati ayeste ukeste hyponomon. That's kind of fun. They have this kind of symmetrical or balanced acoustic thing going on there, but ayeste ukeste. Even the stress falls on the first syllable ayeste, and then on the last syllable ukeste.
Yeah, fascinating. Cool. And then that leaves spirit and law as, we're wondering what the relationship is between those two. So the translation here, we got a de.
That
which
is interesting. Before you go into that, I mean, real quick, just pneumati, right? You have the P and the nu, and then you have hyponomon. You have the P and the nu right there. Pretty That's kind of interesting. You almost have another balance. Pneumati hyponomon.
Yeah.
Anyways,
yeah. So the de makes a distinctive point. Moreover, I would say here makes good sense. Moreover, if by the Spirit you are being led, ayese is middle, passive. So here probably kind of a passive sense of subject affectedness, being led, and the pneumati is fronted again as the dative of instrument. Even though Spirit's person, we could say maybe dative of person. Dative of agent, we can maybe say. But if you are being led by the Spirit, that's the protasis. This is a conditional clause. And so this is the condition, the protasis. Then it's followed by the conclusion or the apodosis. You are not under law. So if led by the Spirit, then you are not under law. Now, this seems to come almost out of nowhere because he's not been talking about law for a while. He was back in 13, 14, 15, the law being fulfilled in one word, love, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So when you're in a discourse, the author will need to kind of do some deep dives, but every now and then they'll resurface. And here it's kind of like a resurfacing to kind of the issue. And the issue is that that people are agitating the Galatians, the recipients of this epistle, to somehow come under the law. And I think by implication, they say that Paul's message was inadequate. It didn't go far enough. If you really want to be sanctified, if you really want to go all the way, if you really want to be God's people as God's people are intended to be, you need to follow us and come under the law. And if you come under the law, you'll be able to lead a life of moral perfection. And Paul advocates a different pathway to sanctification. Law observance is not that pathway. The law as a body of teaching, which apparently this is what law means. It means like instruction, but it also comes to represent a covenantal relationship that had obligations that entailed, not least of which, the need to offer sacrifice for failures. So built into the law covenant system was a need to admit, confess, and offer sacrifices for sins. Ergo, I think Paul could argue, we continue to have a sin problem underneath the law. But if we live by the Spirit, which is a new covenantal reality, then we don't need to come back underneath the law. The law was, remember, pointing us to Christ. The law was a guardian, a tutor, teaching us things until we reach maturity. And that maturity is Christ itself. So walking or being led by the Spirit creates a condition under which we don't need to be under the law. We're not under the law anymore. The type of condition this is called a present simple condition. So E with the present indicative followed by a present indicative. Now, why that's so significant is because it's present simple. It's assuming these as kind of basic realities or facts of the case, which is true. This is the situation on the ground. This is the exigency that Paul is writing into. This is stuff that is facing the people right now. And this is the present reality. This is the present condition that is laying before them, the need for being led by the Spirit. And consequentially, this means that you're not underneath the law covenant. Yeah, so Spirit.
Ooh, yeah, this was another one that makes me squirm. Just straight up honest. Yeah. I don't see an agenda in Paul to like get rid of the law. I don't see that agenda in Jesus, others, or as well, right? But I think.
What would that even look like? You mean get rid of the law? That's kind of an idiom.
Well, so when we say you're not under the law, that means like I think when the average person hears that, they think, oh, there's no point. Like it's not necessary. It has no bearing on my life. And I don't think Paul's saying that, and I don't think Jesus is saying that. I think what he's simply saying is you're not being led by it, but I still think, again, there's value in the law, that it can teach us, it can lead us to repentance, and so I still think there is value in it. And I think Jesus doesn't abrogate the law. Like, there's still value in it. So I guess I would read this as more like, if you're being led by the Spirit, like, and then you're under the Spirit, which means that it's not the law that's leading you, and you're not under the law. Although that's not to say there is no value for the law. Again, I just don't want to like poo-poo on the law. I think it's a good and valid and helpful thing. It's just not the thing that puts us in right standing with God.
Well, I hear you there, and I think I understand your struggle. We have to remember where the argument has come from, that there was a mediator in the giving of the law, and the mediator indicates more than one party. So the law is itself a negotiation between God and humanity. whereas Jesus is just pure God. It's not a negotiation.
Yeah,
So
I
the
don't.
covenant
Yeah.
under the law, I mean, it was a religious system. It was a system of relating to God that is now not in effect. That way of relating to God physically now can't be done. I mean, the temple doesn't even exist. And Jesus forewarned the ending of that system in his own lifetime. I think that's his greatest prophetic act. We don't often think of Jesus as prophet, but oh yeah, he was a prophet, and he was weeping over the what was going to happen to his people, which entailed the destruction of the temple. And so that historic event is one of the most unappreciated events in New Testament history. We want to talk about his resurrection and ascension, which are huge, central, but most people don't think about the destruction of the temple and what that signals, as
You
also the
probably
high point of his prophetic ministry, which was tragic. I mean, he's trying to save his contemporaries from going down that road. So all of that is like the symbol of the problem. The problem is a lot of animal death, 250,000 every Passover, according to Josephus, if we trust his numbers. That's a lot of dead lambs. The animal cruelty is done away with. The covenantal system. So the law as a representative of that covenantal system, and in regard to these people on the ground in Galatia, it would have implications of you need to be circumcised. Otherwise, you continue to be a second-class believer. You know, that's pretty serious stuff. I mean, this is socially painful
yes.
stuff. I mean,
And
people are like showing up at the table, some people leaving. I mean, people are like, what the heck's going on here? Like, oh, we're second class again. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that God hates.
that's not the
Jesus
law's
hates.
fault. That's not the problem is not the law itself, it's the interpretation and handling of the law. Right? So I think Jesus has a lot of criticism toward the religious officials for that reason. It's not primarily the law's fault. It's the traditions and the
Yeah.
interpretations built up around
Yeah.
the law that Jesus spends
Yeah.
so much time
Yeah.
criticizing. That's my own view.
Yeah. I think the law had a termination date.
I also wouldn't say that the temple was destroyed in 70 CE. In my Revelation commentary that I work on, that it's been done for a little while, but I'm letting it sit. I want to return to it with fresh eyes. If you go back and read, like the temple is still standing after 70. It was damaged, but it doesn't actually get destroyed until 125 CE.
Well, I don't think it's a place of worship after that. I mean, so we can parcel destroy. What does destroy mean? But
Yeah.
uh, the the fact, I think the thing I would like to say though, or distress, is that the law, God didn't intend it to have a permanent place. I don't think
Yeah.
so. It's always pointing beyond itself, and it had a place, and I think it had an what's it called, expiration date. I think it had an expiration date, and
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, we're on very different pages with
yeah.
this. That's interesting.
Well, I mean, to say that doesn't mean that it doesn't have value still, and Paul talks about its value, but as a religious system of practice, cultically and ceremonially and other kinds of ways, no, it's not in effect.
Yeah, we're probably closer than it seems, but
I'm stating it a little bit starkly. I remember taking Galatians with Dr. Carol Stockhausen,
expiration. Yeah,
and
go
and
ahead.
just and just reflecting on Galatians, this doctoral seminar, and it just kind of dawned on me. I'm like, wow, the law becomes a cultural artifact. Does that mean it has no value? No, it has a lot of value, but it's a witness. It's a witness. Paul does say it's a witness, and they're types for us to learn from.
Yeah.
And that's huge. And for the early Christians, it was their scripture, right? Because the New Testament was being written down. So, but it's always testifying and pointing to Christ. And the practices and behaviors described in them, certain of them didn't apply. Circumcision and other kinds of things.
Here's how I would frame what we're about to read, right? So Paul's been talking about the fruit of the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit. And he's about to say in the next verse that the fruit of the flesh, the works of the flesh, as he calls it, but I say fruit of the flesh just for the parallel, are things like sexual immorality and idolatry and so on and so forth. He's going to give this vice list. And the point, a large point of the law was, one, like a preventative measure to like help prevent you from doing those,
Mm-hmm.
but two, as a sort of revelatory or recognizing measure that when you have done those, the role of the law is to point it out to you that you're guilty, right? So when you're under the law, like what it's doing is bringing to mind these vices, whether that is to avoid them or you need to repent of them. And I think what he's saying, when you're walking in the Spirit and when you're under the Spirit, like, it isn't focusing on those negative things, but it's actually focusing on goodness and gentleness, like the fruit of the Spirit. Like, so when you're walking under the law versus walking in the Spirit, your mind is in two different places. And it's turning your focus to two different things. So
Mm-hmm.
would you rather be walking in a life where you're constantly like thinking about, oh, I better not commit sexual immorality, or walking in a way that says, yeah, I'm striving on toward holiness, I'm pressing into holiness, pressing on toward holiness? Like, it's two different ways of living. The law's still valuable, but it's a different way to live than as if you're walking in the Spirit. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I think that's where he's going.
Yeah, I would say the law is more than just morality. It's anti-idolatry.
Yeah, of course, he's
It's
getting ready to say
separating from idolatry. But yeah, and it's trying to teach them how to walk with the Lord. And so there are core principles of mercy and justice, hospitality, as well as vices to be avoided. Chapter 18 of Leviticus. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think I don't know that Paul's going to make that argument here. I think he's framed it in such a way that these two ways of living are pointing you in two different directions of focus or thought.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, it's interesting.
I think he's already made the point. That's why he doesn't need to make it here. If you go back to the early part of chapter 4, it's clear that the law is a slave tutor pointing to Christ, the reality, the maturity, the full sonship and heirship, and
I
is in
don't
Christ.
disagree with that.
Yeah.
I would, yeah, if you look at like a maturity spectrum, right? Think of it like that, or like a Klein, right? So you have like full on immaturity over here, and then full on maturity over here. There's like this spectrum, and that however long it goes, like the earlier portion of the spectrum, right, would be that the law, right, where you're focused on don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, beware of this, right? And that's maybe a less mature a spiritual way of living, or a less mature spiritual life than like, no, I need to do this. This is how I need to be living. Goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, like these sorts of things. Like,
Yeah.
that's how I'm envisioning it. Perhaps
Yeah.
I'm wrong, but that's where my mind's at.
I think the mechanism is that Jesus is the ideal king. Jesus
Yeah.
is the Messiah
Yeah.
who embodies virtue and law. And this was the nature of the ideal king. He doesn't need a law. He's internalized the law. And even in Deuteronomy, was it 14 or is it 17? The king was to take a copy of the law and make his own copy of the law. So there
Yeah.
was supposed to be a close relationship between the king and the law, presumably so that he would live out justice.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that wasn't realized. And so there was a need for Jesus. Only God could do what God could do to do it and to take on the human form
Yeah.
and to fully embody that justice, and then give us that same spirit. So I think there's a mechanism here culturally, ideologically, that we need to recover in terms of law and embodiment of law, or moving past the need for law. There's an
Right.
article by Hadrill Wallace, and this takes us, we're really kind of tangenting today, but he looks at, I was just giving this to a friend today, Wallace Hadrill. It's called the Augustan Age of Sin. It's called the Golden Age of Sin, the Golden Age and Sin, an Augustan Ideology. This is a classical scholar, Andrew Wallace Hadrill, but he describes that with Augustus there was an understanding of a moving away from law to like a kind of embodiment. But anyway, there's some cultural dynamics here that I think we need to recover, honestly.
Well, yeah. There's an old book by a monograph Julian Smith called that Christ the Ideal King. I think it's part
Yeah,
of the argument, right? Where he's
yeah,
making, and I think I was in physical therapy last week, and my therapist was ranting about Donald Trump when he was in office, and that's fine. I don't care. But her particular rant was, and we did this when Bill Clinton was in office too. But her particular rant was like, look at the things. Like, what am I
mhm,
supposed to tell my teenage son
yeah,
when the president is saying things about grabbing women in the crotch, or like the person
yeah,
who is supposed to embody the highest ideals
yeah,
of our
yeah,
society is like
absolutely.
saying and doing these things. What am I
Hmm.
supposed to tell my son?
Yeah,
Like, and I think that's kind of like, when we look at that book by Julian Smith and what you're referring to, that yeah, the king, the priest, the religious officials were supposed to be the embodiment of the law, but it became so corrupt that it was just turned into a joke. And so Christ
hmm,
comes and he
hmm,
is the embodiment of the law, and it is summed up in him and fulfilled in him, which is not to say there's no value in it, but yeah, I think that president analogy is a really good one. Again, we saw
yeah,
the same thing with Bill Clinton. I remember being, a younger at the time and hearing people lament the same thing, like,
oh yeah,
what does it say about our nation that our president's doing these kinds of things?
in the
And
Oval
what
Office.
example does that set for our young men?
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Well, we're kind of like right on the verge of the list of what we've been describing about the failure of the flesh, the works of the flesh. So
should we
let's
wait?
read verse
Should we do that?
19.
You want to do
Pardon me?
19? You want
Want
to
me
do
to read?
19 now, or do you want to wait and do it in another episode?
Oh, I'm okay. Let's we can maybe do that. We can get all the vices together. If we
Uh,
don't go off on little tangents.
Tangents. There are no tangents. I don't think so.
No, that's fun. It's fun. Yeah, we can end with verse 19. Wow, have we just stopped with one verse that consists of only 8 words?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we're going to stop. Okay. Well, I'm a little disappointed. No, that's fine. That's fine. No, I think it's a good time to stop.
So, do you have a parting shot for us? If you don't, I do.
Go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay.
I'll save mine for
All right.
later.
I don't know. I don't have a clue who this is from, but this is funny. I just thought it was funny. I sent it to a friend this morning. It says, I don't have a train of thought. I have 7 trains on 4 tracks that narrowly avoid each other when the paths cross, and all the conductors are screaming. And then I sent that to my friend, and he wrote back, actually, you have 4 trains, a complex bus system, and the New York City subway. So,
Yeah. Thanks, friend.
but
Yeah.
anyways, I thought that was fun. So,
Well, thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to us and following us. We appreciate your support and questions. And so share, like, and we appreciate you listening and watching us, and we look forward to having you do that next time. Take care, everybody.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.